Now, ladies and gentlemen, the man that first wrote the line, and now, ladies and germs. Now, how far does that one go back? Good evening, ladies and germs.
You know, I've been in the business 37 years, and that was old when I got started. I would assume that it began in the early 1930s.
Bob Orben, how are you?
Very well, Ken.
It's a pleasure to talk with you again. We have Paul Harvey on this station as a regular, and he's constantly quoting lines that you've come up with.
I am eternally grateful to Paul Harvey.
Well, he keeps your name around, but not that you need any help. I think you're probably one of the world's most recognized joke writers, aren't you?
Well, actually, in many instances, I'm described as one of the most prolific and most unknown to the general public. It isn't in the nature of being of a joke writer being in the spotlight. Usually, you succeed to the extent that your client succeeds, and he or she is the one in the spotlight.
And you've had some important clients. Red Skelton happens to come to mind.
Right. I worked for Red for 6 years on the Red Skelton Show in the 1960s.
Jack Parr.
Right. Did a couple of years for Jack in New York.
And you've written for political figures, too. In fact, you spent some time in Washington, didn't you?
Well, in the 70s, during the Ford administration, I was at first a speechwriter, first a consultant, then a speechwriter for President Ford, and the last year at the White House, director of the White House speechwriting department.
There are the writers that always turn out the material for people to deliver. I'm always wondering, and there's a constant argument, which is more important, the way you deliver it or the material itself? And I want to ask you that question. But you're actually one of these people that not only writes, but you deliver it as well. Our farm director, Art Sechrest, saw you in Kansas City, and you addressed the group there, and they really had a good time with you.
Well, that's good to hear. Actually, within every comedy writer, there's a scared comic trying to get out. And I'm no exception. I never performed very much until about 10, 12 years ago, and then I started to do banquet and luncheon speeches on how to use humor in communication, and that's essentially what I did at the Farm Broadcasters Convention.
Mm-hmm. So you've tried material. Have you ever gone in with something you think is really dynamite and it just sort of lays there?
Well, not really. I think very few professional comedy writers, when they're standing up themselves, are going in with anything less than the very, very best. Mm-hmm. And if you're worth your salt, you may have a joke that gets a smaller reaction than you anticipated, but it would be very unlikely that you'd get a joke that you have a joke that would get zero. It's always amusing to me. Every once in a while, Bob Hope comes into Washington, D.C., where I live, to do a benefit, usually. He's very active in charities. And I remember one time he was just rolling along with a monologue. Everything was going very well until he hit one joke that got absolutely nothing. You could have said a prayer to it. And it didn't bother Hope in the least. He just sort of looked up at the audience, nodded his head, and said, "I see," and then just went right on to the next joke. You know, when you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars, as Bob Hope is, and you own the world, nothing's going to faze you.
That's right. Well, if you watch Johnny Carson at all, sometimes the funniest evenings are those nights when he's really coming up with some losers.
Well, that's true, but a Johnny Carson and any other performer worth their salt is not standing up there unarmed. On the cue sheet for Johnny and in the memory bank of all of these performers are what's called savers, jokes to tell when the audience reaction wasn't there, or if you have a pun and there's a groan, there's a saver.
Mm-hmm. And the same goes for heckler lines too, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
I don't imagine you address the groups where you get heckled much, though.
A change of attitude about hecklers. I think overwhelmingly now, performers don't challenge them; they sort of ignore them, and somebody from management quietly comes over and talks to them.
It's 10 after 10. Bob Orben has a new book out, and this is handy for anybody that ever has to get up in front of a group, because this is the ammunition you need. It's called 2100 Laughs for All Occasions, and this has to be your umpteenth book, doesn't it?
This is the 45th.
Yeah. Plus
you sound sad.
I wish I could come up with material like you do. Every once in a while, somebody will come up with a line, I'm sure, that they think is pretty funny, and they'll say, well, that's one. But how do you turn it out week after week after week?
Well, it's called a living. You know, I'm 55 years old. I don't have a muscle on my body, and if I can't write jokes, it's all over for me. So I'd better turn it out. I write on average 25 jokes a day. I set a quota of 25 jokes a day, and I hang in there pretty much until I reach that quota. And that's 7 days a week.
Is it hard to become a comedy writer, Bob?
Well, it's hard in the sense that, unlike most other types of writing, a comedy writer is asking for immediate audience involvement. If you write a play, you're only expected to get applause or lack thereof after 2¼ hours or after each of the acts. And if you're doing comedy, you're asking that audience to react every time you come to a punchline. And if you work at the pace of a Johnny Carson, that's 2 or 3 times a minute. Mm-hmm. So it's an extremely hard type of writing.
But just to get started, I saw where they submitted the script for Casablanca again to a bunch of Hollywood producers, and hardly anybody recognized what it was, but they turned it down.
Wasn't that frightening? That's I don't think that's the norm, in the sense that it's been my observation of comedy writers that have come up in the last 10 or 20 years, or certainly during my span of 37 years, that the good ones get snapped up right away. 10 years ago, if you could write jokes at all and you were a woman, you couldn't miss in Hollywood. And they're still very eager to find woman comedy writers.
I wonder why women, all of a sudden.
Well, it was a tremendous imbalance for many years. And there were only 2 or 3 comedy writers who were women in the business at all during most of my lifetime. And as a result, everything had a male-slanted ring to it. It's why all of the comedians in the business, the woman comedians, would be standing up there doing jokes about how they can't drive, how they can't cook, how they can't get a man, how they're ugly, clumsy, you name it. And it was overwhelmingly because the material was written by male comedy writers. Mm-hmm. Now, the Louis Tomlins and that approach have given comedy a much greater balance.
It's 12 after 10 o'clock. We're visiting with Robert Orben, author of a new book called 2100 Laughs for All Occasions.
It's the 17th anniversary sale of Benson's Appliance. 17 years of quality products at low prices backed by the famous Red Carpet Service. Don't miss this opportunity to save on every microwave, refrigerator, washer, dryer, dishwasher, stove, or oven. With 4 stores in Central Illinois to serve you, they're a volume dealer, and that means lower prices to you. Buy today with only 10% down and no payments till April 15th. So come on down with the prices right only at Bill Benson's Appliance, East Oakland and Veterans Parkway in Bloomington.
Leroy State Bank reminds you that it's that time of year again. Tax time is coming, so it's also time to start your own individual retirement account. You'll reduce Uncle Sam's share of your income and be able to retire a lot richer. If you're employed, you can begin your IRA at Leroy State Bank with any size deposit. Both your savings and your interest up to $2,000 a year are tax-deferred until retirement. Don't let your time run out. Ask for complete details about this excellent tax shelter now at Leroy State Bank in Leroy. Member FDIC.
Hi, this is Kurt Zimmer. Over the years, you've come to know us as Kurt's Auto Body. Well, now we have another way to remember us, as CARS. That stands for Kurt's Auto Body Repair Shop. CARS for short. After all, that's what our business is really all about. And as a matter of fact, that's all we really do. We're the experts when it comes to getting your auto body back into shape. Our only other specialty is customer satisfaction. That means that if we at CARS haven't satisfied you, then we haven't done our job right. Call me, Kurt Zimmer, at CARS and see for yourself.
It's 14 after 10 o'clock. If you have a question for Bob Orben this morning, give us a call. We can take your question or comment at 829-2345 or 1-800-322-9377. I'm just thinking about certain issues. I guess I don't think I've ever read anything that you've written that has been off the wall, off color, I should say. You don't really tend to get into blue material at all, do you?
Well, I can't. There might be some sexual subjects, obviously, I've written jokes about. In fact, the last category in 2100 Laughs for All Occasions is X-rated movies. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about the new morality and things of that sort. But by and large, there's precious little in any of my books or in my comedy service, Orben's Current Comedy, that couldn't be done on any network television show, and that's a pretty good gauge of acceptability.
Why isn't so many nightclub acts now? I mean, it's just unheard of not to hear every word you can think of.
Well, I get rather discouraged about that. I started in the nightclub field as a variety comedy writer. I used to write for nightclub comedians, and And frankly, in those days, nightclub comedy and even burlesque looks like Sesame Street compared to what they're doing now. There's one performer in particular, a brilliant performer, but anybody who can use the same four-letter word 4 times in one sentence, I think, is overdoing it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessary. It's shock. It's the laughter of shock. And after a while, the shock wears off, and the material should be there.
Actually, we're going to get to the point, I suppose, where a golly is more effective than some of the four-letter words.
Quite possibly.
Are there ever any issues that are too sensitive to deal with? I'm thinking we're going through a stage now. I just saw in the news again where 20,000 people were lined up for a job.
Yes.
Is the economy going to be? I know you talk about the economy in the book, and there's some funny lines in here. But are there ever moments when maybe it's a little too sensitive to even deal with?
There's no question that you have to use good judgment in that area. It's President Reagan got himself into a little trouble about a month or two ago when he did a switch on a joke that he did all the way through his campaign.
Now what's a switch?
A switch essentially is you have, say, a joke, the jokes that were done, let's say, about...
Here's a man that's written...
The actual joke. He did a joke about a recession is when I lose... when you lose your job, a recession... a depression is when I lose my job, and a panic is when my wife loses her job.
Okay.
Now, he used to do a switch on that where he said a recession is when your neighbor loses their job, a depression is when you lose your job, and a recovery is when, I forget who he was using, but when a Republican runs for president, or that sort of switch. Well, he did a switch on this after he got into the White House, just a couple of months ago, and just talking. It wasn't kidding unemployment, but just talking about unemployment was wrong. For this reason, if we hear Mark Russell or Bob Hope or me do jokes about the inflation and the problems of the economy, we're all in this together. We're all suffering, but we look to the president to be the person to solve the problems. So don't tell us jokes, Ronnie. Do something.
Okay, I see your point. Anybody else could have done it, maybe.
That's right.
Not the president in that particular case.
That's right.
And yet he gets off some real zingers sometimes.
Oh, the president, this is sort of nitpicking because President Reagan has been a superlative user of humor. I think one of the great moments of his administration involved humor, and that was immediately after the assassination attempt. They rushed him to George Washington University Hospital here in Washington, and as he stood up with the bullet in his chest going through the lobby, he was saying, I sure hope those surgeons are Republicans. Now,
that's right.
Now, what a marvelous thought that was, because we have grown to distrust official communiques. If the White House had put out a press report, as it did, that said the president was shot, but it's not serious, and he will go in for major surgery, and no complications are expected. There would have been all kinds of rumors going around the country that it was terribly serious, as it was, or that he was already dead, and the country would have been in a panic. But people hearing the president doing jokes on his way to the operating room, they would think to themselves, well, he's shot, but how serious could it be if he's doing jokes?
Right. It's 20 minutes past 10.
On March 25th, some lucky family is going to be boarding a flight with the WJBC gang, destination sunny Florida. Yes, if your name is drawn, you'll win a trip to Disney World and Epcot Center for your immediate family of up to 4 people, with airfare and accommodations at the Orlando Hyatt for 6 nights, and accommodations in Tampa still another night. Admissions for you and all of your family to Disney World, Epcot Center, and Busch Gardens are also included. And if you're 21 or older, you can register at any of our participating sponsors.
Register for a free trip to Disney World and Epcot Center at Brown's Chicken, 1503 East Vernon, Kurt's Body Shop, 2025 Ireland Grove Road, and Adolph's Family Discount Discount Center. That's Adolph's, Veterans Parkway and Route 150 in Bloomington.
Just when you need it most, the Outdoor Store brings you their end-of-the-year clearance sale on exciting John Deere snowmobile fashions and snowmobile parts. Prices have been slashed to just 10% over cost on all great John Deere snowmobile fashions that'll keep you going all winter. Plus, you'll save 20% off on all John Deere snowmobile parts. So hurry in soon. Quantities are limited to supplies on hand during the end-of-the-year clearance sale on John Deere snowmobile fashions and parts at the Outdoor Store, 2714 East Lincoln in Bloomington.
Moberly and Klenner and Ulbrich and Kraft, Central Illinois' leading menswear stores for over 80 years, are crowing about their low prices during their sale. Sweaters as low as $15.88. Zipline raincoats as low as $79.88. Dress shirts as low as $14.88. Choose from such famous brands as Hart, Schaffner, and Marks, Kingsridge, Palm Beach, Christian Dior, J. Ruby, Arrow, and many more. Register for a free chicken dinner from Bob Johnson's Brentville restaurant. Don't walk, run. Run to Moberly and Klenner in Eastland Mall or Ulbrich and Kraft in Cottage Hills Mall and save. We're back with Bob Orben. You had a question.
Yes. Hello, Bob.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, and you?
Very well.
You're a very colorful person.
Well, thank you.
I have a kind of a two-part question. Number one, you spoke of President Ford. Did you know his family very well?
Not very well, but certainly I know all of them, yes.
The reason I ask, I love watching Stephen portray Andy Richards on The Young and the Restless.
You know, I think that's so marvelous because when we were at the White House, Steve was just interested in being a rodeo rider, and he was still a kid. And now to see him as sort of a romantic idol, it makes you feel very old.
He portrays such a supporting actor that I wondered how much of a sense of humor he has.
Oh, I frankly, that I don't know in the sense that I didn't have that much to do with Steve, but the whole family is a family that likes to laugh, that likes to relax. They're real down-to-earth people. So I assume that Steve is no exception.
Okay, well, I said it's so hard to tell when you see an actor or an actress on screen, and you know they have to follow their scripts, but you just wondered maybe to what degree their own humor comes into their character.
Well, I think in any actor or actress, there is the your own personality colors the character, but there's always that person called a director who is telling you how to play the scene.
Okay, well, it's been nice chatting with you.
Same here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
There again, when you're doing your own material in front of a live audience, you are the director, you're the talent, you're everything.
You're everything. In fact, I hold these humor workshops and speechwriting workshops in which I teach executives how to give speeches and how to use humor as part of it. And my counsel to them is you're even your own advanced person, that you should get into the room that you're speaking in early, check out the sound system, check out the lighting, check out the lectern, check out the steps going up to the stage, everything that you have to be aware of to make sure that you're looking like a professional up there and not amateur night.
But the real key is to make it look like it's happening for the very first time, isn't it?
Always. That pertains to your humor and your speech.
Do you find out, I read an interesting book that Steve Allen put together, and he talks about different comedians. In fact, I think he's on his third book about funny people.
That's right.
He says there are those folks who have a natural ability to make people laugh, and other folks that really aren't funny, but they know how to deliver the material. I don't know, he calls it a silly center, I believe, in some cases. Are there comedians around who maybe really aren't all that funny, that couldn't tell a joke except that their acting ability, their ability to deliver other people's material is what they're all based on?
There are comic actors that are just delightful, but couldn't stand up in Vegas or in a nightclub setting and just do a monologue act.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, for those of you who might remember, Wally Cox, the original Mr. Peepers. Well, Wally did a nightclub act that was a very offbeat, interesting act. I used to love it, but it was never very successful. But this shy, sort of offbeat character that he played was just perfect for television, and he was enormously successful in situation comedy.
Mm-hmm. Again, you just mentioned that. Alan talked about that business of being realistic. If it's really lifelike, you can get more of a laugh than you can with something that's not believable and dynamite.
That's right. This is, I suggest to people when they get a book like 2100 Laughs for All Occasions that they don't try to use anything but the material that is relative to their life, their job situation, and to their style of speaking. Otherwise, it comes across as false and the audience won't buy it.
Mm-hmm. And you really have to know the jokes, too. You have them broken down into categories so people can look up the broad subject heading, find out the information that maybe they're going to talk about, look up a joke that would be apropos, and then work it into whatever you're going to do.
Absolutely. In comedy, there are the people with a reputation for great ad-libbing, but I've found overwhelmingly, and certainly Steve Allen is one, but I've found that most other ad-libbers are people with encyclopedic joke memories. They will read a book like this time and time again, and some of the material would stick in their unconscious so that when a situation arises, they've got a joke ready to be thrown into the breach.
You know, speaking of that, it's hard to maybe really come up with a joke that you haven't heard someplace else, and the whole business of plagiarism comes in. Does that happen quite often?
Well, it happens, obviously, because the jokes are only run 15, 20, 25 words, and people feel it doesn't belong to anybody. Well, bodies of material do belong to people, but a book like this, you can't reprint 2,500 jokes to start. 2,100 lasts for all occasions.
Somebody would catch on.
Pardon me?
Somebody would catch on where you got it.
Well, yes. Well, also it's a violation of the copyright law.
Sure.
But the whole purpose of the book is for you to use it verbally. So that isn't plagiarism. That's using the book as it's intended to be used.
However, if you would sit in and watch a nightclub comedian and then all of a sudden think you wrote a joke and maybe you heard it 5 years ago down the line, it gets into kind of a gray area, doesn't it?
Well, actually, if you put a number of comedy writers into separate rooms and say the subject is, say, buying a used car, the likelihood is that many of us will think along similar lines and that we will create the same jokes going along totally independent paths.
Okay. Since you wrote for Red Skelton, I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions about him. I've heard Red Skelton say that 70% of the material he used, he wrote. And Arthur Marks brings this out in the book that he wrote on Skelton. Did he get along well with the writers or not?
Well, he got along while I was on the show, which was 6 years, from 1964 to 1970. It was really quite a good relationship with Red.
Mm-hmm.
Also, as far as, I don't know about percentages, but Red got a writer's credit on the show. Now, that may not seem like so much because it was his ballpark, but the Writers Guild polices the credits rather, that's sort of the Writers Union, they police credits rather strictly, and so I would say Red probably contributed as much as any two of the writers on the show. There were 8 writers altogether.
Mm-hmm.
So he is a marvelously creative person, and nobody worries about the performance more than the person doing it.
In fact, he has one of the funniest shows I think you could ever go attend.
We're going to see it again, too. 130 of the shows have been packaged, and we'll be back on television in September.
So you'll be able to relive some of your jokes, I'm sure.
And relive spending some of the money.
That's right. Bob Orben, a lot of luck with this book. I know you won't need it, but again, if we have some executives are listening who have to address groups from time to time, State Farm Insurance is headquartered right here in Bloomington, Normal. I guess maybe you've seen that little tag on the State Farm commercial.
Oh, yes.
That's just one area. There's all sorts of people from all different sorts of walks of life who could use jokes to break the ice, as it were. And you talk about the key to today's humor. You don't get into the long dissertations like they used to do years ago. You suppose that style is ever going to come back, Bob?
Oh, it truly never left, in the sense that Myron Cohen still tells marvelous stories and is very successful. But the humor of today is one-liners, because if you drop a one-liner into a speech, it's quotable, it's rememberable, and it's the humor of today. It's fast, it's short, and it's effective.
Okay. Can I ask you to come up with one little line for us, maybe that you've written today?
Well, today we have the situation in Washington where President Reagan has finally drawn a compromise on Social Security, and it all came about by a retired person writing a letter to President Reagan and saying, "You've got to do something for us retirees, President Reagan. After all, Ronnie, you were old yourself once."
Okay. There it is, one of the freshest jokes written. You heard it today. Bob Orben, thank you very much.
It's been a delight, Ken.